Welcome to Monk's Temple. A sanctuary of stillness, a harbor for the wandering mind. Tonight, we embark on a quiet journey into the very heart of what it means to be alive. We will explore not a distant philosophy, but a truth as close as your own breath, the gentle, relentless, beautiful truth of change. This is the teaching of impermanence. It is not a doctrine of loss, but a doorway to presence. Before we begin, find a place of comfort. Notice the weight of your body as it meets the surface beneath you. Feel the subtle movement of your breath, a tide that has been rising and falling within you since the moment you were born, without a single thought from you. Let the day's sharp edges soften. And if the peace you find here feels like a refuge, consider making Monk's Temple a part of your journey. Subscribing is a simple act of intention. A way of tending to this shared space of quiet, ensuring it remains here for you, and for others seeking rest. Now, let us begin. Close your eyes if you wish, or simply let your gaze grow soft. We are going to look at a familiar world with unfamiliar eyes. We live our lives building homes on what we believe is solid ground. We construct identities from our memories, our relationships, our careers, our bodies. We whisper to ourselves, "This is who I am. This will last." We point to mountains and say, "Eternal," to love and say, "Forever," to our own convictions and say, "This is the truth." But the teaching of impermanence invites us to a deeper seeing. It says, "Look again. Look at the mountain. It is rising, grain by grain, from tectonic size, and it is being worn down, grain by grain, by wind and rain." It is not a noun, but a verb, mountain ing. Look at your own hand. The skin you see has completely replaced itself in the last month. The cells that carried you through a joy or a sorrow last year are gone, returned to the earth. You are literally not the same physical being you were. This is not metaphor. This is biology. This is physics. The core of the teaching is this: all conditioned phenomena, everything that arises based on causes and conditions, is inherently temporary. Its nature is to arise, to persist for a time, and to cease. Nothing escapes this law. Not a thought, not a star, not a feeling of bliss, not a season of despair. To understand this is to begin to lay down a burden you may not have known you were carrying, the burden of demanding that life be still. The suffering we so often feel is not in the changing itself. It is in the space between what is and what we desperately wish would stay. It is the friction of our clenched hands trying to hold water. So tonight, we will practice opening our hands. We will learn to see change not as a thief in the night, but as the very essence of the night, and the day that follows it. Let's start with a story, not from ancient scrolls, but from the windswept coast of Newfoundland. There was a fisherman named Elias, whose life was the sea. He knew the ocean not as a picture, but as a living being, by its moods, its colors, its smells. His grandfather had taught him to navigate by the old lanes. Specific, seemingly permanent currents that ran like underwater highways between the fishing grounds. For decades, Elias trusted these lanes. They were his inheritance, his certainty in the uncertain deep. Then, the water began to change. Subtly at first. The temperatures shifted by degrees he could feel on his skin. The old lanes, as if grown weary, began to meander, to fade, or to run in new directions. Fish followed the new water. Elias's catches grew thin. His certainty turned to disorientation, then to a quiet panic. He was a master reading a map that was being redrawn beneath his fingers. He tried fighting it. He went to the old coordinates, the sacred grounds of his father and grandfather. He returned with empty nets and a heavier heart. He saw other fishermen, younger, using newfangled sonar, chasing the fish wherever they appeared, with no reverence for the lanes. He felt a deep contempt for them, and a deeper grief for himself. One harsh winter, facing ruin, he finally swallowed his pride and asked one of these young men, Liam, to take him out. Liam's boat was a cacophony of screens and beeping signals. But Liam himself was quiet. He didn't stare at the screens alone, he watched the water, the sky, the birds. "The old lanes are gone, sir," Liam said gently, not with arrogance, but with the solemnity of stating a simple fact. "But the ocean is still talking. It's just speaking a new dialect." He pointed not to a screen, but to a congregation of gulls diving a mile away. The language changed from currents to temperature. From lanes to blooms of plankton. The fish are still here. We just have to learn to listen differently. That day, Elias caught fish. But more importantly, he caught a glimmer of understanding. He had been loyal to a pattern, not to the sea itself. The sea, true to its nature, had changed. His wisdom wasn't useless, it needed translation. His knowledge of water, weather, and creature was still profound, it just had to be applied to a new set of signals. He began to learn. He merged his deep, intuitive feel for the ocean's body with the new data. He became a guide again, not of the old lanes, but of the living, shifting sea. His security, he realized, was never in the permanence of the lanes, but in his capacity to relate to the ocean. When he stopped demanding the ocean conform to his grandfather's map, he could finally see the ocean that was actually there. Elias's story is about the impermanence of external structures, the systems, the patterns, the ways things are, that we build our lives upon. They feel permanent: economic systems, social norms, climate patterns, career paths, but they are all impermanent constructs, rising and falling like waves. Our pain comes when we build our home on the wave's crest and declare it solid ground. Science gives us a powerful lens here, the study of complex adaptive systems. From ecosystems to global markets, these systems are defined by feedback loops, emergence, and constant adaptation. There is no permanent equilibrium, only dynamic flux. Fighting this flux is exhausting. Learning to navigate it, like Elias learning the ocean's new dialect, is the path of wisdom. Now, let's turn this gaze inward, to a place even more intimate, our storehouse of memories. We think of memory as a library, a permanent record. We believe our past is fixed. This belief shapes who we think we are. Let me tell you a story from the neon-lit streets of Tokyo. A man named Kenichi was a keeper of his family's honor. His mind was a meticulous archive of slights and obligations stretching back generations. A business deal gone wrong in his grandfather's time meant a certain family was never to be trusted. A kindness shown 50 years ago demanded a specific repayment now. He carried this ledger with him everywhere, its weight shaping his posture, his decisions, his relationships. He believed this ledger was the truth, the permanent record of his clan's story. Then, a minor stroke affected the part of his brain where these detailed, episodic memories were stored. He recovered physically, but the ledger, blurred. The sharp edges of the old grievances softened. The precise details of obligations grew fuzzy. At first, he was terrified. He was losing himself, his history, his reason for being. He tried desperately to reconstruct the ledger, scribbling notes, interrogating relatives. But the fire of the old resentments wouldn't rekindle. One day, a grandson of the untrustworthy family came to him with a business proposal. By the old ledger, Kenichi should have refused immediately. But the old reaction was just, gone. He saw only an earnest young man with an interesting idea. Hesitantly, he agreed to a meeting. As they talked, Kenichi realized there was no echo of the past in the room. There was only the present. The deal they eventually made was prosperous for both. Kenichi, freed from the prison of the permanent past, found he could breathe more easily. His identity was no longer that of a bookkeeper of ancient wounds, but simply a man in the present, engaging with what was in front of him. The memories he lost were not the truth of his life, they were one story about it. A story that had ended. A new one was beginning. This touches on the impermanence of narrative. Neuroscience shows us that memory is not a replaying of a stored file. It is an act of reconstruction. Each time we recall an event, we reassemble it, and in doing so, we subtly alter it, influenced by our current mood, beliefs, and newer experiences. The memory you have of your 10th birthday is not a pristine recording. It is a story you've been editing and telling yourself for years. The self that is built from this collection of stories is therefore fluid, not fixed. When we cling to a particular narrative as the permanent, unchanging truth of who we are. I am the victim, I am the failure, I am the hero, we freeze ourselves. Kenichi's stroke of grace allowed him to put down a heavy, old book and step into the unwritten page of now. Let's feel this in our own experience. For a moment, bring to mind a memory, any memory. Not a major one, just a small fragment, a meal, a conversation, a walk. Now, instead of getting lost in the content, notice the process of remembering. Feel how the memory arises, it has a beginning. It unfolds. And then, it begins to recede, to fade back into the mind's background. It came, it stayed for a while, and it passed. This is the microcosm. Every memory, every thought, every mental image performs this little dance of birth, life, and death. Your mind, in this very moment, is a flowing stream of these impermanent events. You are the awareness witnessing the stream. You are not the debris floating in it. This brings us to a powerful and often challenging arena. The impermanence of relationships. We fall in love with a moment, a version of a person, and we build a statue of them in our hearts. We say, this is you. But the person is a river. Let's travel to the vibrant, chaotic heart of Mexico City. Sofia and Mateo were artists who fell in love in their 20s amidst the fumes of turpentine and the passion of mural painting. Their love was fierce, dramatic, a torrent of shared creation and bohemian ideals. They were twin flames. They built an identity as the couple that creates together. For a decade, it was magnificent. Then, slowly, the rivers of their interests began to diverge. Sofia grew drawn to the quiet, meticulous art of restoration, to the patience of repairing what was broken. Matteo's fire still burned for large, loud, public statements. He saw her new path as a retreat, a betrayal of their shared revolutionary spirit. She saw his persistence as a refusal to grow. They began to fight, each accusing the other of not being who they really were. They were both looking for the person from 10 years ago. That person, in each other and in themselves, was gone. The breakup was a tectonic shift. Sophia was left not just without a partner, but without the identity of one half of a creative force. She felt hollow. For a year, she simply worked in silence, restoring damaged saints in old churches. The work required her to sublimate her own ego, to become a conduit for the original artist's intent. One day, working on the faded eye of a Madonna, she had a realization. She was not fixing the painting to what it was, but to what it could be, with care and respect for its history. Her love for Matteo had been like that. She had been trying to restore him to a past version, instead of loving the evolving painting he actually was. She wrote him a letter not to reconcile, but to release. She wrote, "I loved a beautiful, wild mural we painted together. That mural is finished. It exists in my memory, and I cherish it. But you are still painting. And so am I. I was wrong to stand in front of your new work, demanding it match the old." She learned that love is not the preservation of a snapshot. It is the continuous, courageous act of meeting the other person in their eternal present, with fresh eyes, again and again. Or it is the gracious act of letting the completed mural be, while you turn to your own new canvas. The pain in relationships often stems from this confusion. We want the security of a finished, understood, permanent entity. But a person is a process. Psychology speaks of the end of history illusion. We know we've changed in the past, but we believe we're essentially done changing now. We extend this fallacy to our loved ones. The practice, then, is to replace assumption with curiosity. To ask, "Who are you today?" instead of relying on the dossier you compiled yesterday. We have begun our journey, touching the impermanence of outer patterns, of inner stories, of the bonds between us. Feel the space these recognitions might be creating. A little less clutching. A little more allowance. This is not passivity. It is the deepest form of engagement, meeting reality as it is, not as we wish it to be. Take a slow, deep breath here. Let the concepts settle like snow. There is no test, only listening. Let's continue our journey into the heart of change. Having touched upon the shifting outer world and the flowing rivers of memory and relationship, we now turn to a vessel that carries us through it all, the body. We often speak of having a body, as if it were a possession, a tool, a home we own. We say, "My hands, my eyes, my strength." But the teaching of impermanence invites us to feel a deeper truth. We don't have a body, we are a body. And this body is a conversation between elements, a temporary gathering of stardust and water, constantly in renewal and decay. I'd like to share a personal memory. When I was a boy, my grandfather had a pocket watch. It was heavy, gold, with a satisfying click when you opened the cover. He would let me hold it, feel its solid, cool weight in my palm. "This was my father's," he'd say. "It will be yours one day." I believed in its permanence. It seemed to defy time, even as it measured it. Years later, when it came to me, I noticed the fine scratches on the glass, the slight wear on the winding stem. I took it to a watchmaker for cleaning. He opened it with delicate tools and showed me the inside. "See here," he said, pointing to the tiniest gears. "This pivot is worn. This spring has lost its temper. These parts were never meant to last forever. They are in a slow conversation with friction." The solid, eternal heirloom was, in truth, a fragile dance of temporary components, each wearing against the other, each moment of ticking a step toward its own eventual stillness. My body, I realized, is that watch. So is yours. For a story of this bodily truth, let's go to the sun-baked clay courts of Rajasthan. There was a potter named Devi, famous for her Kurja blue pottery. Her hands were her genius. Strong, sensitive, knowing exactly the pressure to shape the wet clay, the precise flick of the wrist to apply the cobalt glaze. Her identity was in those hands. They made beauty from earth. As she entered her 60s, arthritis, the silent sculptor, began its work. Her knuckles swelled. The morning stiffness lasted longer. A fine, persistent tremor took up residence in her fingers. The clay, once obedient, became defiant. Bowls wobbled. Glaze lines bled. The beautiful things her hands once made now bore the marks of this new, uninvited collaboration. Shame wrapped around her like a cold shawl. She stopped taking commissions. She hid her hands in the folds of her sari. Her granddaughter, Priya, a medical student home on break, noticed the closed workshop, the silent wheels. One afternoon, Priya brought home a block of special orthopedic clay, soft and pliable, used for therapeutic exercise. Without a word, she placed it on the table between them and began to knead it. Devi ignored her. Priya kept kneading, then began to form a simple coil. Slowly, Devi's eyes were drawn to her granddaughter's hands, confident, smooth, young. Then she looked at her own, resting in her lap like wounded birds. A tear fell. Priya reached over and placed the soft clay in Devi's palm. "Teach it to me, grandmother," she said. "Not the old way. Teach it what your hands know now." It was an act of breathtaking grace. Devi, with trembling fingers, pressed into the clay. It yielded without fight. She began to form a coil, but it was lumpy, uneven. It was not the perfect symmetry of before. But as she worked, focusing not on the product but on the sensation, the coolness, the give, the memory in her muscles, something shifted. She was not making a pot. She was having a conversation with the clay through the new language of her body. The tremor created a rippled texture on the coil. The weakness in her grip made organic, soft indentations. When she finished, she had not a pot, but a small, abstract sculpture, a spiral that looked like a fossilized sea creature, full of texture and history. It was undeniably beautiful, but in a completely different way. It spoke of time, of adaptation, of dialogue between will and limitation. Devi began to work again, not to produce the perfect bowls of her past, but to explore the beauty that could only emerge from this specific, impermanent moment in her body's journey. Her art became more profound because it told the truth. Her hands weren't betraying her, they were telling a new chapter of her story. Devi's story illuminates the impermanence of capacity and physical identity. We attach our worth to what our bodies can do, their strength, their agility, their reliability. When that changes, we feel we are diminishing. But the body's purpose is not to maintain a permanent state of peak performance. Its purpose is to experience, to sense, to be the vehicle of consciousness through the adventure of time. Biology confirms this beautifully and relentlessly. Our cells have programmed lifespans. Telomeres, the protective caps on our chromosomes, shorten with each division, a molecular hourglass. Osteoblasts build bone while osteoclasts break it down. A constant, lifelong renovation project. To resent this process is to resent being alive. The practice is to shift from performance to presence, to feel the body not as a tool that is breaking, but as a landscape that is weathering, with its own unique beauty in each season. Now, let's move from the intimacy of the body to the vast canvas of the impermanence of places and civilizations. We build cities, nations, monuments to outlast us. We etch our names in stone. But stone whispers too. Let's travel to the high desert of Peru, near the lines of Nazca. An archaeologist, Dr. Alvaro, had devoted his life to studying a pre-Incan settlement, a complex of irrigation canals and temples he called the Eternal City. He published papers on its enduring design, its timeless harmony with the landscape. He believed he was uncovering a permanent testament to human ingenuity. Then, a series of unprecedented heavy rains, linked to changing ocean patterns, swept through the arid region. The ancient canals, perfectly designed for a different climate, were overwhelmed. The walls of the eternal temples, eroded by the unaccustomed water, slumped into mud. Dr. Alvaro watched from a ridge, heartbroken, as his life's work seemed to dissolve before him. The Eternal City was washing away. A local Quechua elder, Maruca, came to stand beside him. She was silent for a long time as the rain fell. "You look for the city that stayed," she finally said. "I see the city that knew when to leave." She pointed to higher ground, where her people's current village stood. "My grandmother's stories say our ancestors lived where your stones are." Then the water songs changed. The earth spoke differently. So they listened. They moved. They took the knowledge of canals and built new ones, here. The city was not the stones. The city was the knowing how to listen to the land, and when to flow with its changes. Your eternal city, it was just one sentence in a very long conversation between people and this place. Dr. Alvaro's paradigm shattered. He had been a historian of objects. She was a keeper of process. He began to collaborate with her, not to excavate a static past, but to understand the pattern of adaptation. His work transformed from an epitaph for a dead city to a living study of resilience. The impermanence of the stone structures was not a tragedy, it was a data point in an ongoing story of change. This reflects a geological and historical truth. Continents drift. Seas advance and retreat. Empires rise, plateau, and transform. The pyramids were once smooth, capped in white limestone that gleamed under the sun. That limestone is gone, quarried for other buildings. The permanent monument is itself changing, wearing down, grain by grain, back into the desert. Our attachment to the permanence of places, a childhood home, a favorite forest, a skyline, is an attachment to a moment in that place's long life. The practice is to love the spirit of a place, its essence, while holding lightly to its current form. Let's bring this back to the scale of a single human life, to the impermanence of our roles and titles. We introduce ourselves. I am a doctor, a mother, a CEO, a teacher. These are powerful identities, but they are costumes we wear for acts in a play. The play has many acts. An original story from the world of classical music in St. Petersburg, Masha was a prima ballerina, the very embodiment of the ethereal. Her identity was end point, in the air, in the punishing perfection of her form. She was the Swan Queen. At 38, her body, the exquisite instrument, began its inevitable conversation with time. A ligament refused to heal fully. The arches that defined her line lost some of their elastic lift. The company director, with regretful eyes, suggested she consider transitioning. The word felt like a death sentence. Who was she if not the one in the light? She left the company, adrift. For months, she wandered the city she had once ruled, feeling invisible. One day, drawn by habit, she slipped into the back of the old rehearsal hall. A young, gifted dancer was struggling with the emotional arc of Giselle's mad scene. She had the technique but not the heart. The coach was growing frustrated. On impulse, Masha stood up from the shadows and walked to the bar. She didn't demonstrate a jump or a turn. She simply showed the girl the posture of shattered hope, the collapse of the shoulders not as a technique, but as a memory in the cells. She showed her how the hands could tremble not from weakness, but from a soul coming apart. She spoke of fear, of love, of loss, not as concepts, but as physical sensations. The girl watched, and her imitation transformed into understanding. The coach was stunned. He asked Masha to come back. Slowly, she did. She found that she could not be the Swan Queen anymore, but she could see her, cultivate her, midwife her into being in another. Her identity shifted from the one who performs to the one who sees and awakens. The essence of her art. The communication of profound human feeling through the body did not die. It migrated. It found a new form. Her most profound performance became the light in a young dancer's eyes when the movement finally became truth. Masha's story shows us that when we cling to a role as a permanent identity, its end feels like annihilation. When we see it as a temporary expression of a deeper essence, in her case, artistic passion, we can let the form change while the essence finds new ways to flow. In our own lives, we are not our job title, our parental status, our social role. We are the consciousness that inhabits these roles, temporarily. Letting a role go is not losing ourselves, it is making room for the next expression of our being. Now, let's feel this in the realm of the impermanence of emotional and mental states. This is where the teaching becomes an immediate tool for peace. We say, I am angry, I am sad, I am anxious, as if we have become those things. But we are the sky, not the weather. Let me share an anecdote from a retreat I once attended in the French Alps. A man that was plagued by raging, sudden anger. He described it as a beast that lived inside him, permanent and powerful. The teacher gave him a strange instruction. For the next week, he was to preface every statement about his anger with a phrase. He had to say, in this moment, the experience of anger is present. He resisted. It felt clunky, false. But he tried. The first time anger surged, he muttered through gritted teeth, "In this moment, the experience of anger is present." The simple act of phrasing it that way created a tiny, crucial gap between himself and the emotion. He was not the anger, he was the one noticing the anger. He was the mountain observing the storm cloud. The cloud was real, violent, but it was not the mountain. Over the days, this gap widened. The beast began to look more like a passing weather system. Intense, but temporary. Its permanence was an illusion created by his identification with it. Modern psychology calls this cognitive diffusion in acceptance and commitment therapy. It's the skill of seeing thoughts and feelings as transient events in the mind, rather than as directives or identities. A thought is just a thought. A feeling is just a feeling. They arise, they dwell, they pass. Your awareness is the space in which they happen. When you believe, "I am anxious," you are trapped in the cloud. When you note, "Anxiety is here," you are the sky, holding the cloud. This shift is everything. Let's end this part with a brief, gentle practice. Wherever you are, pause. Notice your dominant emotional tone right now. Boredom, curiosity, relaxation, irritation. Don't judge it. Just name it silently. In this moment, the feeling of underscore 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 is present. Now, take one breath, and imagine this feeling is not you, but a visitor in the guest house of your awareness. It has come. It will, in time, leave. You are the quiet, spacious room. Feel the difference, even if it's subtle. This is the beginning of freedom. We have sat with the changing body, the shifting earth, the evolving roles, and the flowing weather of the heart. We are learning to loosen our grip. Welcome back. We are weaving a tapestry of understanding, thread by thread, learning to see the world not as a collection of frozen things, but as a magnificent, flowing process. In this part, we turn our attention to a powerful force that shapes so much of our suffering and so much of our culture, the pursuit of permanence through possession and achievement. We build monuments of stuff and status, hoping they will make us real, lasting, safe. The teaching of impermanence asks us to consider a radical question: what if true safety lies not in building walls, but in learning to dance with the wind? Let's begin with an original story from a context far removed from ancient temples, the sleek glass towers of a modern metropolis like Singapore. Here we meet James, a private equity manager. His life was a spreadsheet of acquisition, not just of companies, but of experiences, accolades, objects. A penthouse with a view that proved his ascent. A watch that wasn't a timepiece but a complication, a mechanical sermon on his worth. A wine cellar holding vintages older than his father. He believed in the equation, more accumulation equals greater permanence of self. He was constructing a dam against the river of time with bricks of luxury. Then, a market correction, not a crash, but a sustained, quiet downturn, eroded the value of his key assets. It wasn't a dramatic bankruptcy, but a slow leak. The penthouse's value dropped. The watch needed a service costing more than a family's monthly rent. He found himself staring at his treasures, feeling not security, but a low-grade panic. They were not anchors, they were liabilities. They demanded insurance, maintenance, protection. They made him afraid of loss. One night, unable to sleep, he did something irrational. He took his most prized bottle of wine, a Burgundy from a legendary year, and opened it. Not for a celebration, but alone. He poured a glass. He tasted it. It was sublime. And as he drank, he had the clear, startling thought, its value for all these years was a fantasy, a number in a ledger. Its reality is this, a fleeting taste on my tongue, a brief aroma, a moment of warmth. For 20 years, I owned a story. For tonight, I am having an experience. The next week, he began to liquidate, not out of desperation, but out of a newfound desire for lightness. He moved to a smaller, functional apartment. He kept only what he used and loved. He discovered a shocking truth, with less to protect, he felt more secure. His sense of self, untethered from the spreadsheet, began to breathe. He started consulting for social enterprises, finding a different kind of value, one that flowed through him, not one that piled up around him. The dam was gone, and he found he could finally swim in the river. James's story is about the impermanence of wealth and status as identity. We confuse net worth with self-worth. But markets fluctuate, trends change, fortunes dissolve. The Roman denarius, the Spanish doubloon, the Dutch tulip, all symbols of permanent wealth, now historical footnotes. Neuroscience even shows that the thrill of acquisition is fleeting, a dopamine spike that quickly returns to baseline, demanding the next purchase. The happiness derived from experiences, however, and especially from generosity, tends to deepen and linger in memory. The practice here is one of stewardship over ownership, of use over possession. Can we hold things lightly, as temporary guests in our care, appreciating their utility or beauty without needing them to define us or last forever? This leads us naturally to the impermanence of knowledge and certainty. We build fortresses of belief, convinced we have found the permanent truth. Let's travel to the libraries of Timbuktu in the 15th century. A scholar, Abd al-Qadir, had dedicated his life to a single, monumental task, compiling the definitive commentary on a complex point of Islamic astronomy. He believed that with enough cross-referencing of ancient Greek, Persian, and Arabic texts, he could solve the celestial puzzle for all time. His manuscript was his life's work, his claim on eternity. Then, traders from the Portuguese coast brought new instruments and star charts, based not on textual authority but on observed navigation. Their calculations contradicted his masterpiece. At first, Abd al-Qadir dismissed them as heretical fools. But a curious young student in his circle, Farouk, began secretly studying the new methods. He brought his findings to the old scholar, not to defy him, but with genuine awe. "Master," he said, "look. The instrument shows what the eye can see. It is a different path to the same heavens." Abd al-Qadir was faced with a crisis. Cling to his permanent, finished truth and become a relic, or admit that knowledge itself is a river, and his life's work was just a careful sounding of the water at a particular bend. It was a humiliation almost too great to bear. He retired to his study for a week. When he emerged, he called for Farouk. He did not burn his manuscript. Instead, he took a fresh page and began a new preface. He wrote, This work represents the understanding of the heavens as best as it could be known from the books available to me in the year 1487. New eyes now see farther. Let this volume stand not as a wall, but as a foundation upon which newer, taller structures may be built. The truth is not in the ink, but in the endless desire to look up. He had exchanged the identity of the man who knew for the identity of the man who seeks. His legacy became one of intellectual humility and openness, which ultimately proved more enduring than any single conclusion. This story mirrors the scientific method itself, which is built on the impermanence of theories. Newtonian physics was true until Einstein revealed its limitations in extreme conditions. Einstein's work is now the foundation for quantum mechanics, which in turn reveals its own paradoxes. Knowledge doesn't progress by building permanent monuments, but by constructing ever better, temporary scaffolds that allow us to see a little further. In our personal lives, this means holding our opinions, our political views, our core beliefs with a light, open hand. We can be deeply committed to a path while remaining willing to be wrong, to learn, to adjust. Certainty is a closed door. Curiosity is an open window. Now, let's visit a very different environment to explore the impermanence of seasons and cycles within a life. Not the grand cycles of civilizations, but the intimate, inevitable arcs we all traverse. For this, we go to a family olive farm in rural Andalusia, Spain. For generations, the Mendoza family lived by the rhythm of the aceituna, the olive. The patriarch, Abuelo Hector, knew every tree in his grove as an individual. He could tell you, this one gives oil that is peppery, good for early harvest. That one is gentle, better later. His life was the grove, and the grove was eternal. The trees were older than him, they would outlast him. This was his permanence. His grandson, Leo, returned from university in Barcelona with ideas about soil micronutrients, drip irrigation, and phytosanitary controls. He saw the old trees as inefficient, some of them diseased. He proposed a bold, painful plan. To cull a third of the oldest trees and plant new, high-yield, clone varieties in neat, irrigated rows. We must modernize or die, Abuelo, he argued. Hector was devastated. To him, Leo was proposing murder. The old trees weren't just producers, they were ancestors. Their gnarled trunks held family history. Their irregular yields were part of a conversation with the land. A bitter silence fell between them. The crisis came when a blight, new to the region, attacked the grove. The old trees, with their diverse genetics and deep, wild root systems, showed resistance. Many of them fought it off. The new, cloned saplings Leo had already planted in a separate plot were uniformly vulnerable. They died in neat, heartbreaking rows. Leo was humbled. Hector was not triumphant, but sorrowful. He took Leo to the oldest tree, its trunk split and hollowed by time, yet still producing a few precious kilos of fruit. You see the disease there, in the scar? Hector said, his hand on the bark. That was the Great Freeze of '56. This branch that grows sideways. That was after the donkey broke it when I was a boy. This tree did not try to be perfect. It adapted. It accepted damage and grew around it. Its strength is not in its yield, but in its story. You cannot clone a story. You cannot irrigate resilience. Leo saw his mistake. He had sought a permanent, optimized, industrial solution. But life is not optimized, it is adaptive. It is a story of surviving seasons of blight and freeze. Together, they developed a new plan, to protect the ancient trees as a living library of genetics and memory, and to plant new trees not from sterile clones, but from the seeds of the most resilient old ones, creating new, unique individuals that could write their own stories. The impermanence of the old ways was honored, not by freezing them, but by letting their essence, their adaptive wisdom, flow into the future in a new form. The farm's permanence was not in its unchanging state, but in its continuous, intelligent adaptation across generations. This is a lesson in sustainability. Systems that are rigid and optimized for a single condition, high yield, permanent growth, are fragile. Systems that are diverse, redundant, and adaptable, that embrace cycles of growth, decay, and renewal, are resilient. Our own lives are the same. Clinging to a single, peak season of life, youth, career success, early romance, leads to suffering when that season passes. Wisdom lies in appreciating each season for its unique gifts, the energy of spring, the fullness of summer, the release of autumn, the quiet introspection of winter. Let's integrate this with a brief reflection. Think of a season in your own life that has clearly ended, perhaps your school years, a first career, a chapter of raising young children. For a moment, feel the natural bittersweetness of that ending. Now, see if you can identify one quality, one piece of wisdom, or one strength from that season that has flowed forward into who you are now. That essence is permanent. The form has changed. You are not losing chapters, you are writing a book. We have examined the fragile nature of wealth as self, the flowing river of knowledge, and the necessary cycles within a life. Each recognition is a stitch in the fabric of understanding, making it more flexible, more able to withstand the pull of life's currents. Now, we sink deeper. We've observed impermanence in the world around us and within the stories of our lives. But there is a more subtle, pervasive layer to this truth, the impermanence of the very senses through which we perceive the world. Sight, sound, taste, touch, smell, these feel like permanent, reliable windows onto reality. But they are not windows, they are fleeting, constructed events, born and dying in the dark of the brain, moment by moment. Understanding this transforms our relationship with experience itself. Let's begin with an original story from the sensory-rich environment of a spice market in Istanbul. There was a master perfumer, Layla, known as the Nose. Her identity was her olfactory sense. She could walk through the market blindfolded and name every spice, every flower, every essence by scent alone. She could detect the subtle difference between a rose attar distilled at dawn versus dusk. Her world was a tapestry of invisible aromas, and she was its weaver. She believed her sense of smell was a permanent and infallible part of her being. In her late 40s, she contracted a severe respiratory infection. She recovered, but a side effect lingered. A condition called parosmia. Her olfactory wiring had been subtly damaged. Scents were now distorted. The rose attar smelled of burning rubber. Cinnamon evoked the scent of wet ashes. Her world, once a palace of exquisite fragrance, became a house of horrors. She was plunged into a profound depression. She had not lost a sense, she had lost herself. The foundation of her identity, her artistry, her joy, had crumbled. She closed her shop and withdrew from the world. A former client, an elderly man named Mr. Demir who owned a manuscript restoration workshop, heard of her retreat. He was going blind from macular degeneration. He sent her a note, "They tell me the world of light is leaving you. The world of form is leaving me. Perhaps we can be lost together." Intrigued by his odd phrasing, she visited his dusty workshop. He could no longer see the intricate filigree on the pages he repaired, but his fingers had become his eyes. He taught her to feel the raised gold leaf, the texture of different vellums, the almost imperceptible ridge of an old ink line. He said, "The eye gets the glory, but the finger learns the truth." Slowly, he guided her away from the tyranny of her broken nose. He had her close her eyes and identify objects by touch alone, different papers, tools, binding materials. He had her focus on the sounds of the workshop, the scrape of a blade, the flutter of a page, the different qualities of silence. One day, he handed her a lump of ambergris, a rare perfume ingredient. "Don't smell it," he said. "Feel its weight. Its waxiness. Its temperature. Listen to the sound it makes when you tap it." Layla, frustrated, complied. As she focused on these other senses, a strange thing happened. The distorted, burning rubber scent that had plagued her receded into the background. It was still there, but it was no longer the conductor of her reality. She was experiencing the ambergris through a new symphony of data. She began to experiment. She created perfumes not based on top notes of scent, but on notes of texture, of emotional temperature, of memory evoked by sound and touch. She called them portrait perfumes. One, inspired by Mr. Demir, was called the Illuminator's Twilight. It came with a vial of perfume, a square of velvet, and a small, smooth river stone. The instructions were to feel the velvet, hold the stone, then apply the scent. The experience was multisensory, whole. Her crisis had forced her to see that her true artistry was not in a single, permanent sense, but in her capacity to translate experience. Her nose was just one instrument, she was the entire orchestra. Layla's story reveals the impermanence of sensory reality and ability. We take our senses for granted as fixed interpreters. But they degrade, change, and can be lost. More fundamentally, neuroscience shows that perception is not a direct pipeline to reality. It is a constructive act. The brain receives chaotic, incomplete data from the senses and creates our experience in real time, filling in gaps based on memory and expectation. The red you see is not out there, it is a story your brain tells about a specific wavelength of light. When we realize this, we begin to hold our perceptions more lightly. That intense pain, that breathtaking beauty, that irritating sound, they are brilliant, convincing constructions, but they are transient events in consciousness, not the ultimate truth of the moment. This doesn't diminish experience, it liberates us from being tyrannized by it. From the intimacy of perception, let's expand to the impermanence of cultural ideas and social movements. We live in eras that feel definitive. This is the way things are now. But ideas have seasons. Let's set a story in the intellectual salons of Paris in the 1920s. A brilliant philosopher, Elise, was at the heart of a radical new movement called Futurism Integral. It championed a complete break with the past, in art, politics, love, and thought. Its manifestos declared the old world dead. Tradition is tyranny, was their cry. Elise wrote fiery essays, gave galvanizing speeches. She believed they were building the permanent architecture of the human future. The movement was all-consuming, her identity welded to its cause. A decade later, the world changed. The economic and political winds shifted. The sharp, angular optimism of Futurism Integral began to feel naive, even cruel, in the face of new complexities. A younger generation of thinkers emerged, interested not in destroying the past, but in dialoguing with it, in nuance and paradox. Elise, now in her 50s, found herself invited less to speak. Her essays, once revolutionary, were filed away as historical curiosities. She felt obsolete, a fossil of a recent past. Bitterness took root. At a small, subdued literary gathering, she met a historian from Poland, a man named Jan who had survived the war by hiding manuscripts in potato cellars. She lamented the fading of her permanent revolution. He listened, then said quietly, "I spent the war trying to save things people wanted to burn. Not because every old idea was good, but because I came to see that ideas are not soldiers. They are seeds. Your futurism, it was a necessary storm. It cleared the ground. It made space. But a storm does not build the new garden. The seeds that fall after it do. Your work was not to build a permanent house. It was to be the wind that made building possible. The wind has done its job. Now is the season for planting." Elise had confused the temporary, disruptive force of her ideas with a permanent state. She had to let her identity as the revolutionary pass away, and see herself instead as part of a longer, cyclical process of cultural renewal. She began to write again, not manifestos, but reflective letters to young artists, becoming the wise elder who had seen the storm and could now appreciate the fragile green shoots coming after it. Her legacy transformed from a finished monument to a fertile piece of ground. This mirrors the arc of all social movements, technologies, and artistic genres. They arise, peak, and eventually recede or morph into something else. The Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, modernism, each seemed like the final, permanent stage of human development. Each was a season. Holding any current ism as the permanent answer creates rigidity and suffering when change inevitably comes. The practice is to participate fully in the ideas of our time while holding the awareness that they, too, shall pass, making way for the next necessary expression of the human spirit. Now, let's bridge this with a more personal, visceral form of impermanence, the impermanence of health. We coast on spans of wellness, assuming the body will function smoothly indefinitely. Illness or injury arrives not just as a physical event, but as a philosophical shock. A breach in the contract of permanence we didn't know we'd signed. For a story, let's go to a yoga ashram in Rishikesh, India. A teacher named Ananda was renowned for his preternatural flexibility and strength. He could hold advanced postures with effortless grace, his body a silent sermon on discipline and transcendence. Students flocked to him. His identity was the master of the body. During a demonstration, a single, misaligned vertebra in his neck, weakened by years of extreme flexion, compressed a nerve. In an instant, he lost most of the strength and coordination in his right arm. The specialists were clear: no more extreme postures, perhaps ever. The community was shocked. Ananda was devastated. He retreated, ashamed. How could he teach what he could not do? Who was he now? The ashram's cook, a silent, elderly woman named Gauri, had watched his classes for years from the kitchen doorway. One afternoon, she brought him a bowl of dal and sat with him. "You taught the pose," she said in her simple Hindi. "Now you must teach the breath between the poses." He looked at her, confused. She continued, "When I make dal, I don't just throw spices in. I listen to the pot. There is a sound when it needs more water. A smell when the turmeric is cooked. A look when it is ready. For years, you showed us the beautiful, finished pot. Now, maybe you can teach us how to listen to the cooking." Ananda began to teach again, but differently. He sat on a cushion. He guided students through subtle breath awareness, through noticing the spaces between bones, through the intention behind a movement rather than its outer form. He taught them to listen to their bodies as Gauri listened to her Tao. His injury had forced him out of the realm of performance and into the realm of sensitivity. His students discovered a deeper, more sustainable practice. Ananda discovered that his mastery was never in the poses, it was in his profound attention. The form of his teaching changed dramatically, but its essence, the transmission of mindful awareness, became purer, more potent. His broken body became his greatest teaching tool, a living lesson in adaptation and inward listening. This story speaks to a universal experience. Health is a temporary state of balance. The practice is gratitude for wellness when it is here, and courageous, present moment awareness when it is not. It is learning to find the teacher in the illness, as Ananda did. To ask not, why is this happening to me, but what is this asking me to perceive differently? Let's close this part with a short, sensory practice to ground us in the truth of impermanent perception. Wherever you are, choose one sense. Hearing is often easiest. For the next minute, simply listen. Don't name or judge the sounds. Just hear them as pure, vibrating events. Notice how each sound arises from silence, lives for a moment in your awareness, and then dissolves back into silence. The hum of electronics, it appears, it stays, it fades. A distant voice, it emerges, it clarifies, it vanishes. Even the seeming constant, like traffic, is actually a river of individual sound moments. You are the silent, spacious awareness in which this entire, impermanent symphony is playing. Rest in that awareness. We have explored the fleeting nature of our senses, the rising and falling of cultural tides, and the temporary gift of health. With each layer, we are learning to live not in the changing forms, but in the steady, knowing awareness that holds them. We return, settling back into the gentle current of understanding. So far, we've observed impermanence in the outer world, the body, the mind, and the very senses that shape our reality. Now, we turn to a domain that often feels most sacred, most untouchable, the realm of inspiration, creativity, and that which we call genius. We mythologize these as permanent wellsprings, as fixed attributes of a person. The artist has the gift. The writer has a voice. But what if the muse herself is transient, a weather pattern of consciousness? And what if our deepest creative acts are not about capturing permanence, but about honoring flux? Let's begin with an original story from the world of flamenco in the caves of Sacramont, Granada. There was a dancer named La Cachava, famed for her duende, that deep, spiritual anguish and passion that is the soul of flamenco. When she danced, it wasn't performance, it was possession. Audiences wept without knowing why. She believed this duende was a permanent resident in her bones, a gift she owned. For 20 years, it flowed through her like a dark river. Then, in her 40s, the river went dry. The grief that once fueled her art had, through the very act of dancing, genuinely transformed. She had danced out her sorrows. A new, quiet contentment settled in her life, a loving partner, a peaceful home. But when she went to dance, the well was empty. The techniques were there, polished to perfection, but the fire, the spontaneous cry, the duende was gone. She forced herself, producing technically brilliant but emotionally sterile performances. The whispers began, "She's lost it." She felt like a fraud, a ghost haunting her own legacy. She stopped performing. She took a job teaching beginners, the simple zapateado steps, the basic hand movements. It felt like a funeral. One afternoon, teaching a clumsy young girl, she found herself not demonstrating, but explaining. "This hand movement," she said, holding the girl's wrist, "it's not a flower opening. It is the moment you realize the letter you waited for will never come. Feel that in your fingertips." The girl, trying hard, made a stiff, awkward gesture. La Cachava smiled, a genuine smile of compassion for the effort. In that moment of teaching, of translating raw feeling into actionable form for another, a spark flickered. Not the old, all-consuming duende, but something quieter, a tenderness, a connection, a shared longing for expression. She began to choreograph not from her own inner storm, but from observation, from the tired slump of an old man on a bench, from the fierce argument of a teenage couple, from the silent patience of her partner shelling peas. Her new dances were not explosions of personal anguish, but poignant portraits of universal human moments. The fire had become a lantern, casting a softer, wider light. Her audiences didn't weep as violently, they sighed with recognition. She learned that duende was not a permanent possession, but a relationship, a dialogue between her soul and the raw material of life. When the material changed, the dialogue had to change form. Her creativity didn't die, it evolved from a volcano to a garden. This story reveals the impermanence of creative states and inspiration. We romanticize the artist as a conduit for a permanent muse. But creativity is a response to life, and life changes. The youthful anger, the romantic despair, the rebellious fire, these are potent fuels, but they burn out. The artist who clings to them becomes a parody. The true artist learns to listen to what is present now, middle-aged contentment, paternal worry, intellectual curiosity. and find its unique expression. The practice is to let old forms of inspiration die with gratitude, and to court the new, often quieter visitors with an open heart. From the passionate world of flamenco, let's travel to the precise, minimalist aesthetics of a Japanese rock garden in Kyoto. A master gardener, Isao, was the seventh-generation caretaker of the famous Garden of Timeless Stones. His life's work was to maintain its perfection. The exact rake pattern in the gravel representing flowing water, the immutable placement of the 15 rocks, the moss at just the right stage of verdancy. He saw himself not as a creator, but as a preservative force, fighting the entropy of leaves, weather, and time to keep the garden permanently as its original designer intended. His identity was the guardian of the eternal moment. A particularly typhoon swept through Kyoto. It scattered the gravel, displaced two of the sacred rocks, and uprooted an ancient pine that framed the composition. Isao surveyed the wreckage with a heart of lead. The timeless garden was ruined. He saw it as his personal failure, the end of his family's lineage of care. For days, he couldn't bring himself to enter. His daughter, Aiko, an environmental artist from Tokyo, came home. She walked through the damage, not with despair, but with a curious eye. She said, "Father, look. The typhoon has drawn a new pattern. See how the gravel has piled here, like a dune. And this rock, it has turned slightly, as if listening to the other one now. The garden, it has spoken back." Isao was furious. This is not the garden. This is destruction. But Aiko persisted. What is the garden? Is it the arrangement from 1702? Or is it the conversation between human intention and natural force on this piece of land? She convinced him to wait, just for a week, before fixing it. As the days passed, Isao began to see what she saw. The morning light hit the displaced rocks in a new way, casting shadows he had never witnessed. The wind patterns through the damaged pine created a sound like a different kind of flute. The garden was not dead, it was in a new, dynamic state. He realized he had been a museum curator for a dead artist's vision. Now, he was being asked to collaborate with the living forces of nature. With great trepidation, he didn't restore the garden to its old blueprint. Instead, he refined what the typhoon had done, deepening the new gravel patterns, subtly adjusting the angles of the rocks to honor their new relationships. He created the Garden of the Typhoon's Breath, a living testament to impermanence itself. Visitors found it more powerful, more alive. Isao's role transformed from preserver to co-creator with time and chaos. He learned that the deepest beauty often lies not in resisting change, but in incorporating it into the design. This is a profound lesson in the impermanence of our plans and controlled outcomes. We design our lives, our careers, our gardens with a specific, fixed picture of success. When a typhoon, illness, job loss, unexpected event, smashes that picture, we see only ruin. But what if the disruption is not an end, but a new set of materials? The practice is to develop the flexibility to put down the old blueprint and ask, with curious eyes, what has this event created? What new possibilities are now visible? This is the essence of resilience. Now, let's consider a subtle but powerful form of impermanence, the impermanence of reputation and how others see us. We craft a persona, a public self, and we strive to keep it polished and consistent. We want to be known as something, reliable, intelligent, kind, tough. This is another fortress. For a story, let's go to a small, close-knit fishing village in Newfoundland. Tom, True North, Callahan was a legend. His reputation was built on two things: never missing a day's fishing in 40 years, and never asking for or accepting help. He was the embodiment of self-reliance. Storms, ice, personal loss, he faced it all alone. The community revered him, but also kept a respectful distance. His identity was this granite pillar of independence. Then, a fall on his boat left him with a badly broken leg that healed slowly. For the first time, he couldn't work. He couldn't even chop his own firewood. The village, sensing his need but fearing his pride, tiptoed around him. Meals were left on his porch anonymously. He sat inside, stewing in shame. His permanent identity was crumbling, and he saw it as annihilation. The breaking point came when his woodpile ran critically low. He was facing a cold night. He saw his young neighbor, Eli, splitting wood next door. Swallowing a pride that tasted like gall, he hobbled to the fence. Eli, he grunted, not meeting the young man's eyes. "I've a situation." Eli stopped, wiped his brow. "I see that, Tom." A long silence. "I could use a hand," Tom finally forced out, the words alien in his mouth. Eli didn't smile with pity. He simply nodded. "Sure thing. But my back's been acting up. You mind sitting on that stool and steadying the logs for me?" Two hands make lighter work. It was a masterstroke of grace. Eli didn't frame it as charity for a broken man, he framed it as a collaboration between two men with different temporary limitations. As they worked in the crisp air, something in Tom thawed. He wasn't the untouchable legend. He was a man with a broken leg, accepting help. And the sky didn't fall. Later, over a shared whiskey, he found himself talking, really talking, about the fear of getting old, of becoming useless. Word spread subtly through the village: Tom had asked for help. And instead of his reputation being destroyed, it deepened. He became more human, more approachable. People began to visit not to revere the legend, but to check on the man. He discovered a new kind of strength, the strength of vulnerability, of interconnection. His permanent reputation as a lone rock had been a prison. Its dissolution was his release into community. This story shows how our attachment to a fixed social self creates isolation. When we allow ourselves to be seen in our changing, sometimes broken states, we invite real connection. The practice is to care less about managing a permanent image and more about being authentically present in each moment, even, especially, in moments of need or change. Let's integrate this with a brief reflection. Consider one aspect of how you wish to be seen by others: competent, peaceful, funny, strong. Now, imagine that aspect softening, or even temporarily disappearing due to circumstances. Feel the fear that arises. Then, imagine the space that might open up if that image wasn't there to maintain. What more genuine connection might become possible? The impermanence of our persona is not a loss of face, it is an opportunity for heart. We have sat with the changing muse, the disrupted garden, and the crumbling reputation. Each is a liberation in disguise, an invitation to a more authentic, fluid, and connected way of being. Now we venture into a subtle and profound dimension of impermanence, one that lives in the spaces between things, the impermanence of connections, of synchronicity, of the seemingly magical alignments that give our lives meaning. We meet a stranger who feels like an old soul, we stumble upon the perfect book at the perfect time, we have a breakthrough idea in the shower. We call these moments fate, serendipity, meant to be. And then, they pass. The connection fades, the insight integrates, the moment dissolves. We are left either clinging to the memory or doubting its reality. What if these are not permanent gifts from the universe, but fleeting glimpses of a deeper, always connecting fabric of life? Let's begin with a story set in the labyrinthine used bookstores of Buenos Aires. Clara was a solitary archivist, a woman who found more life in century-old letters than in present-day conversation. Her world was the past, preserved. One rainy afternoon, reaching for a volume of Pessoa, her hand brushed against another's. A man, Leo, was reaching for the same book. They laughed, a brief, bright spark in the dusty silence. He was a composer, haunted by a melody he couldn't finish. They talked for hours in a cramped cafe, a torrent of words about loss, art, and the ghosts of Lisbon. It was a connection of stunning immediacy and depth, the kind that novels are written about. They felt, in that afternoon, profoundly known. They exchanged numbers, made plans to meet again. But life, as it does, intervened. Clara's mother fell ill, requiring her attention across the city. Leo received a grant that sent him to Vienna for a month. They exchanged a few texts, full of good intentions, but the fierce, concentrated magic of that first meeting could not be sustained through the drip-feed of modern communication. When they finally did meet again 2 months later, the conversation was polite, searching for the old spark but finding mostly remembered embers. The perfect, temporary alignment of two lonely, open hearts in a rainy bookstore had passed. They parted as friends, with a gentle sadness. Clara felt a sharp sense of failure. She had been given a gift and somehow broken it. She tried to write to him, to recapture it, but the words felt forced. One day, walking by the river, she realized, the connection was not a thing to be owned, but an event to have experienced. It was like a perfect chord struck in an empty hall, brilliant, resonant, and then gone, leaving only the hall changed by its echo. That connection did not fail because it ended. It was complete because it was temporary. It had shown her that her heart could still open that wide, that such conversations were possible. It was not a door to a permanent relationship, but a window thrown open to remind her the air outside was still fresh. She let go of the need to make it permanent, and simply kept the gratitude for the chord that had been struck. Months later, humming to herself, she realized she was humming Leo's unfinished melody. In letting him go, his inspiration had quietly taken root in her. This story illustrates the impermanence of synchronicity and intense connection. We often try to nail these lightning strike moments to the ground, to build a house around them. But their power and beauty often reside in their fleeting nature. They are bursts of clarity, not blueprints for permanence. The practice is to receive these moments as the gifts they are, temporary illuminations on the path. Without demanding they light the whole rest of the journey. We can cherish the connection without clinging to the connector. From the world of human connection, let's expand to the impermanence of scientific paradigms and the stories we tell about reality itself. We believe we live in an age of final answers. For a story, we go to a remote astrophysics observatory in the Atacama Desert. Dr. Aris Thorne had dedicated his career to a grand theory he called the permanent state. A model suggesting that at its most fundamental level, beyond quantum foam and relativity, the universe was in a steady, unchanging state of being. His equations were elegant, his proofs compelling. He was on the cusp of what he believed was the final, unifying theory of everything. His identity was fused with this vision of a permanent, underlying reality. A junior researcher on his team, Maya, was analyzing data from a new deep-field telescope. She kept finding anomalous, faint signals that didn't fit the permanent state. They suggested brief, localized fluctuations in what should have been uniform background energy. At first, Aris dismissed them as instrument error. But Maya, with respectful tenacity, kept presenting more refined data. The evidence grew. Aris faced a crisis. Accepting it meant the beautiful, permanent edifice of his life's work was built on sand. He became irritable, dismissing Maya in meetings. One sleepless night, he left the compound and walked into the desert. The Atacama sky is one of the clearest on Earth, an overwhelming tapestry of stars, nebulas, and the faint smear of other galaxies. He lay on his back on the cold sand, gazing up. He had looked at this sky for 30 years through the lens of his theory. Now, he tried to just see it. The immense, silent, churning flux of it. Stars being born, stars dying, galaxies colliding. Nothing in that vista was in a permanent state. Everything was process. His theory wasn't just wrong, it was a fundamental denial of the testimony of the cosmos itself. His desire for a permanent answer had blinded him to the glorious, endless change that was the answer. He returned at dawn. He called the team together, and with a humility that stunned them, he said, "The permanent state is dead. Maya's data has killed it. Thank you." He then pointed to a whiteboard. What we are seeing is not error. It is the universe breathing. Let's study the breath. His work transformed from proving a static truth to mapping the dynamics of cosmic impermanence. He became a better scientist, and a wiser man, when he traded his permanent theory for a lifelong curiosity about the magnificent, unending change. This mirrors the history of science. Each age believes it has the final model, only to have it superseded. The flat Earth, the geocentric universe, Newton's clockwork, the static universe. All were permanent truths in their time. Progress is the story of embracing the impermanence of our current best understanding. In our personal lives, this means holding our deepest beliefs about how life, relationships, or the world should work with open hands, ready to be surprised, ready to learn. Now, let's draw this back to the most intimate landscape, the impermanence of family structures and roles. We are born into a configuration, parents, siblings. That feels like the fundamental, permanent architecture of our world. Then, it changes. Children grow, parents age, siblings scatter, new members arrive through marriage or friendship, others leave through distance or death. Clinging to the original configuration is a recipe for heartache. For a story, let's visit a multi-generational home in Chennai, India. The patriarch, Mr. Iyer, presided over a bustling household of his 2 sons, their wives, and his grandchildren. He was the sun around which the family planets orbited. His word was law, his traditions were immutable. The family's identity was this ordered, hierarchical constellation. As his sons grew into middle age, their own ideas, careers, and desires for their children began to chafe against his rule. Gentle suggestions about different education paths, different business ideas, were met with stern reminders of the way things are. The house grew tense with unspoken rebellion. Mr. Iyer had a mild stroke. It didn't incapacitate him, but it forced him to slow down, to sit more, to observe. From his chair on the veranda, he began to notice what he had been too busy directing to see. He saw his eldest son's talent for calming his own anxious child, a patience Mr. Iyer himself had never possessed. He saw his daughter-in-law's shrewd understanding of modern finance, which had saved the family business from a bad investment he had championed. He saw his grandchildren not as extensions of his legacy, but as unique individuals with their own sparks. The immutable constellation was, in truth, a dynamic solar system, with new stars igniting and old ones changing their light. One evening, he called the family together. He did not give a directive. He said, "I have been the lighthouse, thinking I must always show the one true way. But the harbor has grown. New ships have come, with their own captains and their own charts. A lighthouse that does not acknowledge new channels becomes a hazard." He proposed a family council, where each adult, and even the older grandchildren, had a voice. He became less of a patriarch and more of the eldest advisor, the keeper of the family's core stories of resilience and love, while releasing control over its daily navigation. The family structure changed from a rigid hierarchy to a living, adaptive network. Its permanence was not in its form, but in its commitment to hold each member through all the changes life would bring. This story teaches that the family is a verb, not a noun. It is not a fixed unit, but a process of loving adaptation. The practice is to honor the roots while giving the branches space to grow in their own direction, and to welcome new growth, even when it changes the shape of the tree. Let's close this part with a brief, connective meditation. Think of a relationship in your life that has changed form, a parent who has aged, a child who has grown, a friendship that has evolved. Feel the bittersweet truth of that change. Now, See if you can identify one strand of love or connection that has remained constant through the change. That strand is the essence. The forms are the clothing it wears in different seasons. Rest your attention on that essential strand. We have contemplated the fleeting magic of connection, the fall of scientific absolutes, and the beautiful, necessary evolution of family. Each is a lesson in appreciating the temporary configuration while trusting the eternal process of relating. We move now into a territory that can feel like the very antithesis of impermanence, the world of vows, promises, and commitments. We swear to love forever, to remain loyal, to uphold a duty until death. These feel like permanent anchors in the flowing stream. Yet, even here, in this realm of sacred intention, the teaching of impermanence has a subtle and profound wisdom to offer. It does not ask us to break our promises, but to understand their true nature, not as frozen statues, but as living, breathing paths we choose, again and again, in the face of inevitable change. Let's begin with an original story from the high Himalayas, in a remote monastery in Ladakh. A young monk, Tenzin, took his lifetime vows with immense solemnity. He vowed to follow the precepts, to stay in his monastery, to dedicate his life to practice. For years, his commitment was a solid rock. Then, a severe flood damaged the monastery's ancient irrigation system, threatening the village below that relied on its water. The abbot, old and frail, tasked the monks with rebuilding it. Tenzin, who had a keen mind for puzzles and flow, became obsessed with the engineering challenge. He found ancient texts on water management, experimented with mud and stone, and slowly, the system came back to life. In the process, he discovered a deep, unexpected joy in making and fixing, a hands-on engagement with the world that his purely contemplative practice lacked. A quiet conflict grew in him. His vow was to the inner life of the monastery. But his heart now sang when solving the outer, practical problems of the village. He felt he was breaking his vow by wanting to learn engineering, to maybe even leave to study it properly. He confessed his turmoil to the abbot, expecting a reprimand to recommit. The old abbot was silent for a long time, watching the water now flowing smoothly through the new channel. "You made a vow to a path of awakening," the abbot finally said. "You saw that path as living within these walls, in silence. The flood came. It changed the landscape of your practice. The vow is not to the walls, Tenzin. It is to the awakening. If the path to awakening for you now runs through this water channel, through learning to heal the earth that sustains your brothers and the village, then that is the path you must walk. A vow is a direction, not a cage. To follow its true spirit sometimes means leaving its original form." Tenzin left, with the abbot's blessing, to study ecological engineering. He remained a monk in his heart, but his monastery became the wider world, his meditation the mindful repair of broken systems. His commitment didn't break, it deepened and expanded. This story reveals the impermanence of the forms our commitments take. We vow to a person, an institution, a career path. But the person changes, the institution evolves, the career path transforms. The essence of the commitment, to love, to service, to growth. can remain unwavering, even as its expression must adapt to the changing reality of life. Clinging to the original form of a commitment when its context has utterly changed can turn devotion into imprisonment. The practice is to keep our heart aligned with the spirit of our promise, while allowing wisdom to guide its changing expression. From the mountains, let's travel to the grounded world of Midwestern American farmland. A story of the impermanence of land and legacy. The Henderson family had worked the same 1,000 acres for 5 generations. The deed, the soil, the very oak tree marking the northwest corner were permanent. Old Joe Henderson's identity was this land. He believed his sacred duty was to pass it on, whole and unchanged, to his son, Ben. But Ben, after studying agricultural science, saw a different future. The monoculture of corn was depleting the soil. He wanted to convert 1/3 of the land to regenerative practices. Rotating crops, introducing livestock, restoring prairie strips. To Joe, this wasn't improvement, it was desecration, a breaking of the permanent pattern laid down by his father and his father's father. This land is not yours to experiment on. Joe would boom. It's your job to keep it as it is. Their conflict poisoned the dinner table. Joe saw Ben as disrespecting permanence. Ben saw Joe as guaranteeing the farm's slow death. The crisis came during a historic drought. The conventional cornfields withered. But a small test plot Ben had secretly planted with deep-rooted, drought-resistant perennial grains thrived, a green oasis in a brown sea. Joe stood at the edge of the 2 fields, the evidence undeniable. The permanent way was failing. The land itself was speaking, demanding change. With great pain, Joe faced the truth. His commitment was not to the methods of his grandfather, but to the life of the land. Preserving the methods was killing the life. Letting Ben innovate was the truer form of fidelity. He handed Ben the keys to the equipment shed, a silent, monumental surrender. Ben's reforms saved the farm. Joe, in his later years, found a new role as the recorder of change, keeping a journal of the new birds returning to the prairie strips, the improved water retention in the soil. His legacy transformed from being the guardian of sameness to being the witness of intelligent adaptation. The land was permanent in their care, but impermanent in its needs and expression. This is a potent lesson for any tradition, business, or institution. The commitment is to the core purpose or vitality, not to the specific practices of a bygone era. The practice is traditioning, the active, dynamic process of passing on a living flame, not a dead torch. Now, let's explore a more internal, psychological form of permanence, the impermanence of personal resolutions and self-concepts. We decide, I am a non-smoker now, I am a calm person, I am someone who exercises daily. We turn a desired state into a permanent identity. And then, we have a cigarette, lose our temper, or skip the gym for a week. The shame can be crushing. We feel we have broken something permanent within ourselves. For a story, let's go to a boxing gym in Liverpool. Danny, the discipline, was a fighter known for his ironclad routine and clean living. After a bad knockout, he retired and vowed to become a peaceful man. He meditated, took up yoga, spoke softly. He built an identity as a sage, leaving the violent animal of his past behind. He believed he had achieved a permanent state of tranquility. One day, he witnessed a gang of youths harassing an elderly shopkeeper. A red-hot fury, ancient and familiar, exploded in his chest. Before he could think, he was in the middle of them, his fighter's instincts in full flow, the situation diffused but through the very aggression he had sworn off. Afterward, trembling, he was awash in shame. He had lost his permanent peace. He was a fraud, still just a thug in a yoga shirt. He went to his old trainer, a man named Paddy who had seen everything. Danny confessed his failure. Paddy lit a cigar. "You think you built a castle of peace on top of the old volcano," Paddy said. "The volcano is still there, lad. It's part of the geography. Your mistake was trying to pretend it was gone. That fury you felt for that old man, that's not the animal. That's the protector. You didn't lose your peace. Your peace recruited an old ally for a job only it could do. The goal isn't to have a permanent state with no volcanoes. It's to know the whole landscape, the quiet meadows and the fire mountains, and to be wise about which part of yourself the moment calls for." Danny's understanding of his own transformation shifted. He wasn't a peaceful man who had failed. He was a complex man learning to integrate all his parts. His peace became more resilient because it was honest. It included the capacity for righteous fury, but was no longer ruled by it. His self-concept became fluid, adaptive, real. This story speaks to the danger of identity foreclosure. When we label ourselves with a permanent trait, "I am an addict, I am a success, I am a failure," we freeze our potential for change and create suffering when we inevitably act outside that label. The practice is to see ourselves as a collection of changing potentials, of passing states. We can have a thought of anger without being an angry person. We can skip a workout without being lazy. We are the sky, not the weather. Let's end this part with a simple, forgiving reflection. Bring to mind a recent time you broke a personal rule or resolution, ate the cake, snapped at a loved one, procrastinated. Instead of judging it as a failure of a permanent you, see it simply as a choice that arose and passed in the flow of your day. A cloud that crossed the sky of your awareness. It does not define the sky. The sky, your aware, knowing presence, is vast enough to hold that cloud, and all the clouds to come, without being stained by any of them. Breathe into that vastness. We have seen how vows must breathe, how land must adapt, and how our self-image must stay fluid. In each case, the attempt to make something permanent creates fragility. Allowing for change creates strength, authenticity, and true, enduring commitment. We now turn to a facet of impermanence that is both majestic and intimate. The impermanence of collective memory, of history itself. We build museums, write textbooks, erect monuments, believing we are etching the permanent record. We speak of learning from history so it doesn't repeat. But history is not a fixed tape we can replay. It is a story we tell, and the story changes with every generation that tells it. The past is not a solid country we can revisit, it is a shape-shifting dream, remembered differently by every dreamer. Let's begin with an original story from the ancient city of Alexandria, not in its heyday, but centuries later. A Coptic monk, Brother Bulis, was the last keeper of a minor scriptorium that had once been a satellite of the great library. His life's devotion was to a single, crumbling codex, a history of a now-vanished desert kingdom, written by a lone traveler. He believed this codex contained the one true, permanent account of that lost civilization. He spent decades cross-referencing its facts, illuminating its pages, protecting it from damp and time. His identity was the guardian of this singular truth. A young, brash scholar from Baghdad, Khalid, arrived on a journey of knowledge. He had studied different accounts of the same desert kingdom from Persian traders' logs and Bedouin oral poems. He asked to see the famous codex. Brother Bulis presented it with reverence. Khalid read, his brow furrowing. "This says the kingdom fell due to a weak king's heresy," Khalid said. "The Persian logs say it was a decades-long drought. The Bedouin poems say a beautiful queen made a pact with a jinn that backfired." Brother Bulis stiffened. "Those are fables. This," he said, touching the vellum, "is history." Khalid replied gently, "No, brother. This is a history. One man saw weak leadership. Another saw no rain. Another saw a love story gone wrong. The kingdom fell. That is the only permanent fact. The why is a mirror held up by each teller." Brother Bulis was shaken. He had spent his life polishing a single mirror, believing it was the only true reflection. Khalid's words suggested his life's work was not preserving the truth, but one perspective on a vanished truth. At first, he felt despair. Then, curiosity. He asked Khalid to share the trader's logs and recite the poems. As he listened to the three stories side by side, a richer, more tragic, more human picture emerged than any single account could provide. He didn't discard his codex. Instead, he began a new work, a manuscript that presented all three narratives in parallel columns. On the title page, he wrote, "Three Truths of the Fallen Kingdom." He became not the guardian of a single permanent story, but a curator of multiple, temporary truths. His legacy became one of inclusive understanding, not defensive certainty. This story reveals the impermanence of historical narrative and collective memory. What a society remembers, celebrates, or vilifies is constantly being revised. Statues are toppled, revisionist histories are written, forgotten heroes are rediscovered. This isn't a flaw, it's a natural process of a living culture renegotiating its relationship with its past. The practice, for us, is to hold the stories we've been told, about our nation, our family, even ourselves, with a light grip. We can respect them as important chapters without believing they are the final, authoritative edition. We make room for other voices, other interpretations, understanding that the full truth is a mosaic of temporary, subjective fragments. From the realm of recorded history, let's move to the impermanence of natural landscapes and ecosystems, which we often call wilderness or pristine, as if they are permanent preserves. For a story, let's go to the bayous of Louisiana, where a third-generation shrimper, Remy, knew his waters like the lines on his own face. He knew the secret passes, the shrimp beds that returned year after year, the old cypress trees that were navigational markers. This wetland was his permanent, unchanging world. Then, the changes came, first slowly, then with gathering speed. Saltwater intrusion from rising seas killed the freshwater grasses. The old cypress markers rotted and fell. The shrimp migrated to new, unfamiliar grounds. Remy's map was being erased. He felt a grief as deep as for a dying friend. He blamed engineers, politicians, faraway factories. A young marine biologist, Chloe, was studying the changes. She asked Remy to take her out, not as a guide, but as a witness. As they navigated the strange, altered landscape, Remy pointed out what was gone. Chloe listened, then pointed to what was arriving. See those grasses? That's a saltmarsh species. It's new here. And those birds, they never used to nest this far inland. Remy saw only loss. Chloe was documenting a transformation. It's not dying, she said quietly. It's becoming something else. A different kind of place. The wetland you knew was a moment in a thousands-year dance between river, sea, and land. The music changed tempo. The dance continues, just new steps. Remy resisted. He wanted his old dance back. But day after day on the water, he began to see what she saw. Life was stubborn. It wasn't leaving, it was adapting. New fish followed the new grasses. New birds ate the new fish. The ecosystem wasn't vanishing, it was transitioning into a brackish, hybrid state. His grief didn't disappear, but it was joined by a somber awe. He began to work with Chloe, using his intimate knowledge of water movement to help predict where the new ecosystems would establish. He became a guide again, not to the old bayou, but to the process of change itself. His home was impermanent, yes, but it was also resilient, teaching him the ultimate lesson: there is no final, permanent form of nature. There is only endless, creative response. This is a direct lesson from ecology. There is no climax forest that stays forever. Forests undergo succession, fire, regrowth, change. Coral reefs bleach and may recover in new ways. Attachment to a specific, frozen snapshot of nature causes deep ecological grief. The practice is to develop a love for the process of nature, its intelligence, its adaptability, even as we mourn the loss of specific forms we cherished. Our commitment must be to the health of the process, not the preservation of a single stage. Now, let's turn to a lighter, but pervasive, form of impermanence, the impermanence of trends, fashions, and cultural tastes. We immerse ourselves in the music, slang, and style of our youth, believing they define a permanent cool. We scoff at the new as inferior. This is the comedic tragedy of becoming dated. For a story, let's visit a legendary vinyl record store in Berlin, owned by Klaus, a man whose identity was welded to the post-punk and industrial scene of the early 80s. His store was a temple to a specific, frozen moment in time. He viewed anything with a digital heartbeat as sacrilege. He was the guardian of the true sound. His niece, Lenny, a digital composer, tried to get him to stock ambient electronica or even vinyl reissues of hip-hop classics. He refused. That is not music. It has no soul, he'd grumble. The store's customers grew older, fewer. Facing closure, Lenny made a last-ditch proposal: let her host one night, just one, where she would respond to his classics with her digital equipment. He agreed, miserably, seeing it as a wake. The night came. Lenny didn't replace his music. She used her synthesizers and samplers to play with it, isolating a legendary bass line from one of his sacred records and weaving it into a new, pulsing atmospheric piece. She took the anguished vocal scream from another and turned it into a haunting, echoing motif. The young crowd was mesmerized. Klaus stood at the back, arms crossed. But as he listened, he heard something. He heard the soul of his music, the rebellion, the texture, the raw emotion, not being replaced, but being conversed with. It was alive in a new body. After the set, a young woman came to him, eyes wide. That bass line, what record is that from? It's incredible. For the first time in years, he had a customer asking about his music. Lenny's impermanent, trendy technology hadn't killed the past, it had introduced it to a new generation. Klaus's role shifted from guardian of a relic to translator of a legacy. He started stocking a small selection of new music that respected the lineage, as he put it. His store didn't become a museum, it became a living bridge. This story is a gentle reminder that our cultural touchstones are temporary. The practice is to enjoy the styles and sounds of our time without needing them to be the permanent high watermark of culture. We can appreciate the new as the next generation's sincere attempt to make meaning, often standing on the shoulders of what we loved. It's all part of the endless remix. Let's close with a brief reflection on memory itself. Think of a shared event from your past, a family holiday, a school experience. Now, consider how someone else who was there might remember it differently. Can you hold both versions as valid, as temporary truths shaped by individual perception? Can you see the past not as a fixed point, but as a constellation of perspectives, twinkling in and out of focus? This spaciousness is the gift of understanding the impermanence of story. We have seen how history reshapes itself, how nature transitions, and how culture endlessly reinvents its expressions. In each, permanence is an illusion. Life is not a monument, it is a conversation. We arrive now at a profound and deeply personal crossroads in our exploration. We've examined the impermanence of things, relationships, ideas, and memories. But what of the one who perceives all this? What of the witness, the knower, the I that feels these losses and joys? Is there something permanent behind the eyes? This is the heart of the inquiry. The teaching of impermanence, when followed to its end, turns the gaze back upon the gazer. It asks, if everything you can observe is changing, what is it that observes? Let's begin not with a story of someone else, but with an invitation to your own direct experience. For a moment, close your eyes. Notice the thoughts moving through your mind. See if you can catch one. Perhaps a thought about this talk, a memory, a plan for later. Watch it arise, linger, and dissolve. Now, ask yourself, who saw that thought come and go? The thought itself can't see itself. There is an awareness that witnessed it. Now, notice a sensation in your body, the pressure of where you sit, the temperature of the air on your skin. That sensation is known. What is it that knows the sensation? Not another sensation, but a knowing presence. This presence, this aware, knowing space, is what we often confusedly call I. But look at it directly. Does it have a shape? A color? A beginning or end? Or is it more like the open sky, in which all the clouds of thought, sensation, and feeling appear? This is our starting point. Now, for a story that grapples with this directly. Let's travel to a hermitage on the slopes of Mount Koya in Japan. A monk named Hideo had spent 30 years in intense meditation, seeking to find and solidify his true self, the permanent, unchanging essence he called his Buddha nature. He believed that through sheer effort, he could uncover this diamond-like core and rest in it permanently. He sat through pain, boredom, and profound visions, always striving, grasping for that permanent state of enlightenment. One autumn, exhausted and discouraged, he left the hermitage for a walk in the maple forest. The trees were a riot of crimson and gold. He sat by a stream, his mind finally too tired to strive. He just watched the leaves fall. One leaf, in particular, caught his eye. It spun down, landed on the water, and was carried away. He watched it until it vanished around a bend. And in that simple, effortless watching, something clicked. The effort to find his true self fell away. Like the leaf. What remained was just the watching itself. The pure, effortless awareness that had witnessed the leaf, the stream, his own tired thoughts. That awareness was not something he needed to find. It was what he had always been. It was the condition in which all his searching had taken place. He had been like a fish frantically searching for water. The true self he sought wasn't a permanent thing to be found. It was the permanent capacity to be aware that was already fully present. It was the sky, not a star within it. He returned to the hermitage, not enlightened in the way he imagined, but with a deep, quiet relaxation into the knowing presence that he was. His search ended because he realized he was what he was looking for. Hideo's story points to the subtle pivot at the end of the path of impermanence. When we see that all objects of awareness, thoughts, feelings, sensations, are impermanent, we are left with awareness itself, the subject. This aware space is often mistaken for nothing, for emptiness. But it is not a void. It is a luminous, cognizant space. It doesn't come and go like a thought. It is the condition for coming and going. You cannot remember a time it wasn't there, because all remembering happens within it. This is not a metaphysical claim, it is an experiential invitation. Look for yourself. From this subtle recognition, let's explore how it changes our relationship with life's most intense experiences, those of love and grief. We often feel these as permanent alterations to our being. I will never love again. This grief will never end. But even these tectonic emotions arise and reside within the aware space. Let's have a story set in the foggy hills of San Francisco. Eleanor was a poet whose wife, Maya, had died after a long illness. The grief was not a wave, it was the new ocean in which she lived. She felt permanently altered, broken, defined by loss. She stopped writing. The world was gray. She believed this was her permanent state. A year later, cleaning out a closet, she found a box of Maya's birding journals. Meticulous notes on sightings, weather, and little sketches. A sentence caught her eye: "Today, the red-tailed hawk is back on the phone pole. She is not the same hawk as last year. But she fills the same space in the sky." Eleanor took the journals to the nearby botanical garden, a place they had loved. She sat on their bench. The grief was there, heavy. But she opened a journal and began to read Maya's observations aloud, softly. As she read the careful words describing the shape of a cloud, the first bloom of a magnolia, something happened. The grief did not disappear. But it ceased to be the entire room. It became a powerful, poignant presence in the room, and the room itself was her awareness, which also held the sound of her voice, the smell of damp earth, the memory of Maya's focus. She was not just grief. She was the space holding grief, and also holding love, memory, and the present moment garden. She began to write again, not to escape grief, but from this larger space. The poems were sad, yes, but they also had a breathtaking clarity, a tenderness for the fleeting world Maya had so lovingly documented. Eleanor discovered that her capacity to love was not buried with Maya. It was the very awareness that now held the grief. That awareness was permanent. Its contents, the specific, cherished person, were tragically, beautifully impermanent. This is the alchemy of this teaching. It does not ask us not to grieve or not to love passionately. It invites us to feel these emotions fully, while resting in the knowing that they are moving experiences within a vast, unchanging awareness that is our true nature. The love itself is not impermanent, it is the essence of awareness. The form the love takes, this particular person, this relationship, is what changes. Now, let's ground this with a final, original story that brings it into the realm of everyday action. In a busy London neighborhood, there was a community organizer named Sam, who was a whirlwind of campaigns, saving a local library, organizing a food co-op, protesting a new development. His identity was the fighter, the one who resisted change to preserve what was good. He was constantly angry, burnt out, seeing impermanence as the enemy to be defeated at all costs. During a tense council meeting, he felt a sharp pain in his chest and collapsed. It wasn't a heart attack, but a severe panic attack, his body's rebellion. In the forced stillness of recovery, a therapist asked him a simple question: "What are you trying to make permanent?" He listed them: the library, the green space, the character of the neighborhood. "And if you could not save any of those things," the therapist asked, "what would be left of you?" Sam was stunned into silence. He had no answer. He was his campaigns. He started a practice, just 5 minutes a day, of sitting and asking, "What is here before the fight?" At first, all he felt was anxiety and urgency. But slowly, beneath that, he detected a quieter layer, a deep care for his community, a longing for connection, a love for the place. The fight was one expression of that care. But the care itself was more fundamental. With this shift, his activism changed. He still organized, but he began to host community suppers first, to listen more than lecture. He fought for the library not just as a building, but as a vessel for the permanent human needs for story and connection, needs that would find a way with or without that specific building. When the development was approved despite his efforts, he was able to channel his care into ensuring it included affordable housing and a new community space. He was no longer trying to freeze the neighborhood in time. He was trying to guide its inevitable change with wisdom and heart. His sense of self was no longer tied to winning or losing a battle, but to the enduring quality of care he brought to the process. Sam's story shows the ultimate application: when we identify with the aware, caring presence within us, rather than with the temporary roles we play or outcomes we seek, our actions become more effective and less exhausting. We become a stable, compassionate presence within the flow of change, rather than a rock futilely trying to dam the river. Let's end this part with a resting practice. For the next minute, let go of all focus on content, on thoughts, stories, problems. Simply feel the aliveness of your body. The hum of energy. The simple fact of being present. In this aliveness, there is a knowing. You know you are here. Rest in that knowing itself. Don't try to define it or hold it. Just be it. This is the ground that does not change, even as everything that appears upon it does. We have peered into the nature of the witness, seen how even love and grief are held in its embrace, and discovered how to act from this ground of being. We are nearing the completion of our journey. Welcome back. We have traveled a long and winding path through the landscapes of change, from our bodies and thoughts to our relationships, cultures, and even our sense of self. Now, as we near the end of our exploration, we come to a quiet meadow within this understanding, the art of living from impermanence, not just with it. This is where philosophy becomes practice, where insight becomes a way of walking through the world. It is the cultivation of a heart that is both deeply engaged and lightly held. Let's begin with a final, original story that weaves many threads together. Let's go to a small, unassuming botanical garden in the Pacific Northwest, curated by an elderly woman named Ilara. This was no ordinary garden. Ilara called it the Garden of Completions. It contained only plants that were in the process of dying back. Autumn blooming flowers going to seed. Grasses turning gold and brittle. Leaves in every stage of decay, from vibrant red to skeletal lace. There were no bright spring blossoms here, no lush summer growth. Visitors often found it unsettling at first, a garden dedicated not to life, but to the beauty of life's release. Ilara had been a vibrant theater director in her youth. A sudden neurological condition had gradually stolen her balance and fine motor control, ending her career. For years, she raged against the dying of her light. One fall, confined to a bench in her overgrown yard, she watched a single maple leaf. It didn't just fall, it performed a slow, twisting dance, a final, glorious piece of choreography before joining the earth. In that moment, her director's eye saw not death, but a profound and moving performance. She began to notice the elegance in all of it. The sculptural curl of a dried fern, the intricate architecture of a seed pod splitting open, the way frost etched breathtaking patterns on decaying leaves. She bought the neglected lot next door and began her garden. She didn't fight the processes of browning, wilting, and mold. She arranged them, highlighted them, created paths that led visitors to sit and contemplate a single, perfectly crumbling mushroom. Children loved it, seeing fairy castles in the rot. Artists came to sketch. The dyeing, she showed them, was not a uniform gray, but a symphony of colors, textures, and forms more complex than any bloom. Ilara had taken the central wound of her life, the impermanence of her own vitality, and had not just accepted it, she had become its curator, its poet. She found a creativity more profound than any stage production. She taught visitors to see, and in seeing, to lose their fear. Her garden was a masterpiece of non-attachment, a living lesson that the final act is not a tragedy, but a necessary and beautiful part of the whole play. Ilara's story embodies the ultimate shift, from resistance to appreciation. This is the essence of living from impermanence. It is the aesthetic of wabi-sabi, finding beauty in imperfection, incompleteness, and transience. It is the understanding that a cracked bowl repaired with gold, kintsugi, is more beautiful for having been broken. The practice is to actively look for this beauty in your own life, in the lines on your face that map years of laughter and concern, in the worn spot on your favorite chair, in the quiet ending of a day. It is to say, this, too, is part of the beauty. Now, let's make this practical. How does one actually live this way? It manifests in countless small, daily orientations. First, in speech and communication. When we understand that moods and perspectives are temporary, we become slower to speak in permanent absolutes. We say, "I feel hurt right now," instead of, "You always hurt me." We say, "This is my current understanding," instead of, "This is the truth." Our words become more accurate, more humble, and leave room for change, in us and in others. Second, in decision-making. We make choices with more flexibility, holding our plans lightly. We pursue a career path not as a permanent identity, but as a current expression of our interests and values, knowing both may evolve. We invest in relationships not as finished products, but as living dialogues that will require constant rediscovery. This doesn't make us fickle, it makes us resilient and responsive. Third, in the use of time. Knowing deeply that this conversation, this meal, this quiet evening will never happen again in just this way, we pay closer attention. We put down the phone. We listen more intently. We taste the food. We feel the breeze. Impermanence is the great motivator for presence. It's the reason we cherish a sunset, because we know it will be gone in minutes. Fourth, in the release of grievance. When we are wronged, the pain is real. But the story of what they did to me can become a permanent, poisoning monument in our minds. Understanding impermanence means seeing that the person who hurt you is not the same person today. You are not the same person you were when you were hurt. The event was a terrible, temporary storm. Clinging to it is choosing to live forever in its reign. Letting it go is not saying it didn't matter, it's saying you choose to walk in the weather of the present, which has changed. To illustrate this final point, let's have one last, brief story. In a small town in Ireland, two brothers, Sean and Michael, hadn't spoken in 20 years over a disputed inheritance. The details were foggy to everyone but them, the bitterness was crystalline. Sean, the elder, was diagnosed with a terminal illness. Michael heard through the family grapevine. The old anger felt heavy, pointless. He didn't go for reconciliation. He went because he thought, the lad who took my share is gone. The lad who cared about it is gone, too. There's just an sick old man who shares my name and my childhood. He showed up at Sean's door with no speech prepared, just a bottle of whiskey. Sean let him in. They didn't talk about the land or the money. They talked about the fishing hole of their boyhood, the sound of their mother singing, the stupid, shared jokes that no one else would understand. They laughed until they cried. The grievance, which had seemed so permanent, vanished like mist in the sun of their shared, impermanent humanity. Sean died a week later. Michael had not gotten his land back. He had gotten his brother back, for a few precious hours. He got to remember that before the permanent feud, there had been a temporary, perfect boyhood. And that was what lasted. This is the power of the teaching. It doesn't just help us let go of what's gone, it helps us reclaim what was always real beneath the temporary conflict. So, as we draw our journey to a close, let's rest in the profound simplicity of it all. The teaching of impermanence is not a dark message about loss. It is a bright, liberating truth about the nature of aliveness. Everything flows. You are part of that flow. The suffering comes when you stick a pole in the riverbed and try to tie yourself to it. The peace comes when you let go, and float, and swim, and appreciate the ever-changing banks, the shifting light on the water, the other temporary travelers sharing the current with you. Your body will change. Your thoughts will change. Your relationships will change. Your circumstances will change. The awareness that knows all this changing. That is what you most essentially are. That is your home. It is unchanging in its capacity to know change. You can rest there. Tonight, you have been given many seeds. Don't try to hold them all. Let them settle into the soil of your understanding. Water them with your own attention to life as it happens. In time, They will grow into a natural wisdom, a lighter step, a softer heart, a more present mind. Thank you for spending this time at Monk's Temple. This has been an exploration of Anicca, impermanence. In our next meeting, we will explore its compassionate sister, anatta, or non-self, the releasing of the burden of a solid, separate me, to discover an even greater freedom. But for now, let all the teachings go. Let the stories fade. There is just this breath. This moment. This quiet. Everything is changing, even as you listen. And that is perfectly alright. In fact, it's more than alright. It's what makes this single, unrepeatable moment of your awareness, here and now, so utterly precious. Sleep well. We return. Having gathered the core understanding, that all things flow, we now turn to the subtle art of navigating that flow with grace. This is the practice of equanimity. Not a cold detachment, but a wise, warm balance of the heart. It is the ability to meet gain and loss, praise and blame, pleasure and pain, with an inner steadiness that knows, this, too, is temporary. This, too, shall change. Let's begin with a story set against the backdrop of immense and visible change, the seasonal meltwaters of the Himalayas. In a Sherpa village, there was a guide named Pemba, renowned for his ability to lead climbers through the Khumbu icefall, a treacherous, shifting labyrinth of glacial ice. His skill was not in knowing a permanent path, for none existed. The ice moved daily, sometimes hourly. Crevasses opened without warning, seracs the size of buildings collapsed. His skill was in reading the flow itself. He would study the morning light on the ice, listen to its groans, feel the temperature shift in the wind. He moved with a fluid attentiveness, never planting his axe where he intended to stay, always ready to pivot. He said his practice was to be a snowflake on the glacier's back, present, but not sticking. One year, a wealthy, impatient client demanded Pemba take a direct route he had mapped from old photographs. The mountain is permanent, the client argued. This route worked before. Pemba refused, explaining the ice was a river, not a road. The client hired a less experienced guide. Tragedy struck. Pemba helped in the recovery effort, his heart heavy. Later, the client's family sued him for not preventing their loved one's folly. The village was divided, some praised his integrity, others blamed him for the village's lost income and reputation. Pemba faced both acclaim and condemnation for the same act. He walked high up to a hermitage, to speak with an old lama. He poured out his confusion, the pain of the loss, the sting of blame, the hollowness of praise. The Lama listened, then pointed to a small stream tumbling down the rocks. "Watch it," he said. "See how it praises the rock when it splashes against it. Hear how it blames the rock when it swirls in frustration. The water makes sound, but the rock does not answer. The water moves on. The sounds of praise and blame are just the noises the stream makes as it flows over the changing terrain of the world. Your integrity is the rock. Let the noises of men flow past. They are just the terrain of this season." Pemba returned to his village, quieted. He continued to guide, with the same fluid attention to the ice, but now with a new inner stillness. The external noises of gain and loss, praise and blame, still arose, but they washed over the bedrock of his understanding without sweeping him away. Pemba's story teaches equanimity in the face of external change and social opinion. Our happiness is so often tossed about by whether we are winning or losing, liked or disliked. Equanimity is the development of an inner compass so steady that these changing winds cannot knock us off our true course. The practice is to notice when you are hooked by praise, clinging to it, or by blame, resisting it, and to gently return to the question, am I acting from integrity and care in this moment? That is your bedrock. Now, let's apply this steadiness to a more intimate realm, the impermanence of seasons within a single life, our phases, passions, and purposes. We often believe we must find our one true calling and hold on to it forever. But a life, like a year, has spring, summer, autumn, and winter. Each is valid. Each is temporary. For an original story, let's travel to the American Midwest, to a small town where a woman named Alice was known for one thing, her championship rose garden. For 30 springs, her backyard was a breathtaking spectacle of color and fragrance. She was Alice of the Roses. Her identity was in full bloom from May to July. As she entered her 70s, the physical labor became arduous. Weeds seemed bolder, black spot fungus more persistent. One harsh winter killed many of her prized hybrid teas. The following spring, the garden was patchy, diminished. She felt like a faded version of herself. A young family moved in next door. Their children, fascinated by the flower lady, would peer over the fence. One day, the youngest, a girl named Lily, asked, "Can we help?" Alice, tired, almost said no. But she nodded. The children were chaos, overwatering, stepping on seedlings, but their delight was infectious. Lily in particular loved the ugly parts, the fat, green rosehips that formed after the blooms fell. They look like little apples, she said. Alice, for the first time, really looked at the rosehip. She saw its sturdy, vibrant beauty. She showed Lily how to harvest them and make rosehip tea. The activity shifted. It was no longer about maintaining a perfect, fleeting bloom. It was about the full cycle, the bloom, the hip, the seed, the tea. She began to teach the neighborhood children about pollinators, about composting fallen petals, about the life cycle. Her garden became less a showpiece and more a classroom. Her identity evolved from the creator of beauty to the sharer of cycles. The autumn of her gardening life, focused on harvest and teaching, became as rich as the summer of spectacular bloom. She hadn't lost her purpose, it had ripened into a new form. Alice's story shows us how to hold our own life phases with equanimity. We mourn the passionate spring of young adulthood, the productive summer of midlife. But if we cling to them, we miss the unique gifts of autumn's wisdom and winter's introspection. The practice is to ask, what is the gift of this season of my life, and to embrace it fully, without comparing it to the last. From the slow turn of personal seasons, let's zoom out to the impermanence of collective fortune, of businesses, organizations, and groups. We pour our energy into building a company, a club, a community project. We believe if we build it well, it will last. But all collective endeavors have a lifespan. A story from the world of technology. In the early 2000s, a visionary named Ravi founded a startup creating elegant, dedicated digital music players. His company, Auratone, developed a cult following for its intuitive design and pure sound. They were ahead of their time, a perfect, beautiful edifice built on a specific technology. Then, the smartphone arrived, converging all functions into one device. The market for dedicated players evaporated within 18 months. Ravi fought desperately. Sued for patent infringement, lobbied, pivoted to niche markets. He exhausted himself and his remaining funds trying to preserve the beautiful edifice. The company dissolved in bankruptcy. Devastated, Ravi took a year off, hiking and playing music aimlessly. One day, he met a former employee, now a teacher, who said, "You know, the best thing Auratone made wasn't the player. It was the ethos. The love of uncluttered, intentional experience. That's what we all took with us." This struck Ravi. He had been trying to save the container long after its contents had been poured into the world. He started a non-profit that taught human-centered design principles to social entrepreneurs. He didn't build another company. He became a conduit for the essence of what he loved. The Auratone player was a temporary vessel. The ethos of intentional design was permanent, and it found a new, more impactful form. He found peace not in the survival of the organization, but in the continued journey of its core ideal. This teaches equanimity toward our projects and creations. Our attachment is often to the form, not the function, to the institution, not the inspiration. The practice is to ask, what is the essential value or principle I am trying to bring into the world? Hold to that principle with passion, but hold the specific organizational form lightly, allowing it to change or even dissolve when its time is done, trusting the essence will find new ways to manifest. Let's close this part with a meditation on steadiness. Sit comfortably. Bring to mind a recent minor win, a compliment, a small success. Feel the pleasant glow of it. Now, see it as a wave on the ocean, rising, peaking, and now subsiding back into the vast water. Don't cling to it. Let it be a temporary expression of the ocean's energy. Now, bring to mind a recent minor loss or criticism. Feel the sting. See it, too, as a wave, a different shape, perhaps a trough. Feel it rise, and now let it subside back into the same vast ocean. The ocean is your aware, equanimous presence. The waves are the temporary conditions of praise and blame, success and failure. Rest as the ocean, deep and still, beneath all the changing surface weather. We are cultivating the ability to be unshaken, not by becoming numb, but by becoming vast enough to hold all movement within our stillness. We move now into the heart of relationship, the fertile, challenging ground where the truth of impermanence is felt most acutely and where its understanding can bring the deepest peace. Here, We are not observing distant mountains or abstract ideas, we are facing the living, breathing, changing reality of another heart, and of the bond between. To love in full knowledge of impermanence is perhaps the greatest courage and the purest form of love. Let's begin with a story set in the rhythmic, communal life of a village in Ghana. Akosua and Kofi were married for 50 years. Their love was the bedrock of their large, extended family. Everyone spoke of them as one entity, Akosua and Kofi. Their routines were synchronized, their silences comfortable. They believed, as many do, that their love was a permanent, finished thing. A sturdy, completed house they inhabited together. When Kofi passed away peacefully in his sleep, Akosua was not just grief-stricken, she was profoundly disoriented. It wasn't only the loss of her partner, but the loss of her own identity. She was no longer Akosua and Kofi. She was just Akosua, and that felt like half a person. She moved through the following months like a ghost in her own home, the routines now echoing hollowly. Her children urged her to move, to distract herself, but she resisted, clinging to the physical space of their permanence. One afternoon, her young granddaughter, Alma, was doing a school project on family history. She asked Akosua, "Grandmother, how did you and grandfather meet?" As Akosua began to tell the story, she found herself not just recounting facts, but reliving the uncertainty of it, the butterflies, the doubts, the thrilling sense of possibility. She realized she was telling a story of becoming, not of being. Later, Alma asked, "What was the hardest time?" Akosua spoke of a year of drought when they nearly lost the farm, of the fierce arguments and fears, and then of the shared resolve that saw them through. She was telling a story of adaptation. Day after day, Alma's questions pulled Akosua not into the museum of her finished marriage, but into the dynamic, living history of it, a story of two people constantly negotiating, forgiving, surprising, and choosing each other, through endless changes. Akosua began to see that the permanent love she mourned was an illusion. The reality was far more magnificent. It had been a lifelong dance of two changing people choosing to dance together, step by step, through every season. The dance had ended, but the music, the love that fueled the choosing, was still in her. She began to write these stories down for her family. In doing so, she wasn't preserving a monument, she was passing on the skill of the dance, the skill of choosing, adapting, and forgiving. She reclaimed her full identity not as half of a finished whole, but as a whole person who had participated in a beautiful, temporary dance, and who still carried the music within. Akosua's story reveals the impermanence of relational states and identities. We freeze our relationships at their happiest point and demand they stay there. We see marriage as a destination, not a continuous journey. We see a friend as a fixed character in our story. This creates immense suffering when the other person inevitably grows, or the dynamics shift. The practice is to see every relationship as a living stream. You cannot step into the same stream twice, and you cannot have the same conversation with the same person twice. Each meeting is new. Love becomes the commitment to show up for that newness, to meet the person who is here today, not the memory of who they were yesterday. Now, let's examine a more subtle relational impermanence, the impermanence of rapport, of being on the same wavelength. We have friendships or partnerships where the connection feels effortless, telepathic. We think, this is my person. We just get each other. Then, life pulls you in different directions. The frequency seems to static over. This can feel like a betrayal. For an original story, let's go to a collaborative physics lab at a university in Copenhagen. Lena and Marco were research partners whose intellectual synergy was legendary. They could finish each other's equations, spark ideas in one another that neither could have alone. They were a permanent fixture in each other's professional and personal lives, the perfect intellectual marriage. Then, Lena received a once-in-a-lifetime offer to lead a lab in Singapore. Marco's life was rooted in Copenhagen, aging parents, a partner with a career there. They tried to collaborate remotely, but the magic was gone. The time difference, the lack of whiteboard sessions, the new contexts, it all muffled their connection. They grew frustrated, then distant. Each felt abandoned by the other, as if their perfect, permanent synergy had been carelessly broken. At a conference a year later, they had a strained coffee. The old ease was absent. Finally, Marco said, "I've been trying to get back to our old frequency. It's like tuning a radio to a station that's off the air." Lena nodded, sad. "Maybe," she ventured, "the station isn't off the air. Maybe we're in a different city now, and we need to find what's broadcasting here, between who we are now." They decided to try one more collaboration, but with a new rule: no trying to recreate the past. They started a completely new, small project from scratch, acknowledging their new constraints. The process was clunky at first. But something emerged, a slower, more deliberate form of collaboration, enriched by their now different experiences. It wasn't the old, brilliant spark. It was a steadier, warmer fire. They learned that synergy is not a permanent state, but a temporary alignment of conditions, shared space, shared focus, compatible neuroses. When conditions change, the synergy must either die or evolve into a new form. They had to let the old form go to discover the new one. This story applies to all deep friendships, creative partnerships, even work teams. The practice is to appreciate the periods of effortless connection as the beautiful, temporary gifts they are, and when they fade, to have the courage to either lovingly release the relationship or patiently, without forcing, discover what new form of connection is possible on the new terrain. Finally, let's look at the impermanence of the family unit as we first know it, the childhood home, with its specific cast of characters and rules, feels like the eternal order. Leaving it, or having it change through divorce, death, or estrangement, can feel like the universe breaking its own laws. A story from a ranch in Montana, the Turner family gatherings were legendary, 3 generations under one roof for Thanksgiving, a cacophony of shared jokes, political arguments, and the same cherished, if tedious, rituals. For the youngest grandson, Cody, this was the permanent anchor of his world. Then, his parents divorced. The following Thanksgiving, there were 2 tables in 2 states. The following year, his grandfather died. The year after that, a bitter falling out between his uncle and aunt split the family into factions. The permanent gathering was gone. Cody, now in college, felt untethered and cynical. He avoided family events altogether. A professor, noting his withdrawn state, shared a personal story. "My family's homeland was split by a war," he said. "The village, the house, the way of life, gone. Poof. We had to learn that the family isn't the place or even the people in one configuration. The family is the story you carry. And you can choose to tell a new chapter." Inspired, Cody did something simple. He started a private online group for his scattered cousins and siblings. He called it Turner Tales. He posted old photos, prompted questions, remember the time the turkey caught fire, and shared his own memories. Slowly, others began to contribute. From different states, different factions. They weren't recreating the old gathering. They were creating a new, digital, asynchronous hearth. It was different, imperfect, less noisy, more thoughtful. But it was a connection. Cody realized he couldn't preserve the old family unit, but he could become a weaver of the family narrative, creating a new, flexible net to hold them across the distances. The family's permanence was not in its formation, but in its ongoing, chosen story. The practice here is to honor the family you were given, while actively, consciously participating in creating the family you choose to sustain, which may include friends, mentors, and chosen kin. The form is always temporary. The function of mutual care and shared story is what we can choose to make enduring. Let's end with a relational reflection. Bring to mind someone important to you. Instead of thinking of them as a fixed personality, imagine them as a river. Picture them at the source. As a child, see them flowing through the landscape of their life, gaining tributaries of experience, wearing away banks of old habits, carving new channels. See them now, in this moment, as this specific point in the river's long journey. Your relationship is the meeting of your river with theirs. It has changed, is changing, and will change. Can you send a wish of peace to their river, and to yours, as they both flow onward? This is the essence of loving with awareness of impermanence. We have learned to see relationships as dances, not monuments, as streams, not lakes. This allows us to love more freely, grieve more cleanly, and connect more authentically to the living, changing being before us. We have come to the end of our journey together. We have sat with the changing earth, the aging body, the flowing mind, the shifting sands of relationship, culture, and self. We have traced the truth of impermanence through stories of loss and discovery, resistance and release. Now, as we prepare to part ways for tonight, let us gather these threads not into a knot of sorrow, but into a tapestry of profound freedom. The ultimate invitation of this teaching is not to a life of passive resignation, but to a life of vivid, courageous engagement. When we truly, deeply know that nothing lasts, a radical priority emerges. We stop postponing joy, connection, and authenticity for a future that is not guaranteed. We begin to live from the only place we ever truly have. This present, fleeting moment. Imagine for a moment that you are on a train journey through spectacular, ever-changing scenery. You have a choice. You can spend the entire trip in the baggage car, fretting over your suitcases, worried they might get lost or damaged, rearranging them obsessively. Or, you can take your seat by the window, and give your full attention to the panorama unfolding outside. The mountains giving way to valleys, the rivers snaking through fields, the villages glowing in the dusk. The suitcases, your roles, your possessions, your fixed ideas, will reach the destination with you, or they won't. But the journey itself, the sheer experience of being alive and moving through this world, is happening now, at the window. Impermanence is the ticket that reminds you, you cannot stay in any one vista. So don't miss it by focusing only on the baggage. This is the shift. From curator of a museum of the past, to participant observer in the brilliant, temporary exhibition of now. So, what does this look like in the quiet of an ordinary day? It looks like listening to your child's rambling story, not with half an ear while planning tomorrow's meeting, but with your full presence, knowing this version of them, with this particular wonder and this specific mispronounced word, will never exist again. It looks like feeling the genuine sting of a criticism, but before building a fortress of resentment around it, pausing to ask, will this matter in a year? Is this feeling a permanent truth, or a passing storm in my body? And watching the storm lose its power as you simply acknowledge its temporary nature. It looks like walking through your neighborhood and seeing not just houses and trees, but processes. The weathering of paint, the growth of branches, the slow, silent turn towards decay and renewal that graces all things. It looks like feeling a part of that process, not separate from it. It looks like ending a visit with a loved one, and instead of a casual, "See you later," offering a true look in the eyes and a heartfelt, "Thank you for this time," holding the reality that later is a hope, not a promise. This is not morbid. It is intensely alive. It is the deepest form of respect for the preciousness of life. Let me leave you with one final, very short story, a parable of sorts. In a quiet village, there were two gardeners. The first gardener planted only perennial trees and shrubs, things that would last for decades. He wanted a garden that would be a permanent testament to his skill. He spent his days anxiously pruning, treating disease, and propping up branches, fighting a constant war against time and entropy. His garden was impressive, but it was also a place of quiet anxiety. The second gardener loved annuals, flowers that bloomed with glorious abandon for a single season and then were gone. He also loved vegetables that fruited and were harvested. His garden was in constant, vibrant flux. He would save seeds from the strongest plants, but he never knew exactly what the next season would bring. He spent his days in mindful tending, in the pleasure of the bloom and the satisfaction of the harvest, and in the peaceful clearing of beds in the autumn, making space for the rest and the unknown promise of spring. His garden was not a monument, but a conversation, a joyful, ongoing dialogue with life, death, and rebirth. The first gardener eventually grew old and frail. He could no longer maintain his fight, and he watched his permanent garden decline with despair. The second gardener, also old, simply sat on his bench, watching the goldfinches feast on the last of the sunflower seeds, perfectly content. He had never been fighting, so he had nothing to lose. He had only been participating, so he had everything to gain, season after season. We are all gardeners. The teaching of impermanence asks us, which garden are you tending? Tonight, you have been given many seeds, of insight, of story, of perspective. You do not need to remember them all. You do not need to build a perfect, permanent structure from them. Simply let them fall into the soil of your awareness. Water them with your own mindful attention to life as it happens. Some will sprout quickly, in a moment of letting go. Others may lie dormant for years, until a particular loss or change calls them forth. Trust this process. You are not broken because you lose things. You are alive because you experience things, and all experience is, by nature, passing through. So as we part, return to the simplest anchor, the breath. This breath, arriving. This breath, leaving. Never the same breath twice. A perfect microcosm of the great truth. You are not the breath. You are the awareness that knows the breath. You are not the changing thoughts, feelings, and sensations. You are the boundless, quiet space in which they all arise, play out, and dissolve. Rest in that space. It is your true home. It is permanent in its capacity to hold all impermanence. And from this home, you can go out and meet the changing world with a heart that is both wide open and perfectly free. Thank you for sharing this time at Monk's Temple. This has been Impermanence, the river you cannot step in twice. May the understanding of change bring you not fear, but a profound and lasting peace. May you live with lighter hands and a more present heart. Sleep well, and know that in every ending is a hidden beginning, waiting for your awareness to greet it.